Okay, so I started doing this video, and I kind of, got off on a tangent. I started, gushing about how I was laying praise on on my mentor Jane, and the purpose of this video, I want it to be about, people and ideas that I have been inspired by, that I admire or have, you know, good things to say, some admiration or respect for, or have some sort of fundamental interest in. So Jane, I started off saying, and I got a little carried away, going into her, her work and, that dedication to her work. She was my permaculture instructor and employer for some time, a good maybe 6 years, 5 years maybe. And I got my permaculture certificate from her. She got hers from Bill Mollison directly. I'm not sure if Jeff Lawton and Bill Mollison, but for sure Bill Mollison. So you can look that up, and that's the point of this video. I want, to cite sources for some of the ideas that I have. And, that'll be the first one. Permaculture, Bill Mollison, Jeff Lawton, and Jane, she wasn't my introduction into permaculture, but she taught me the course after I had read the book. She said, most people don't read the whole book. Well, I was really interested. And it was really well put together. So I highly recommend the Permaculture Designer's Manual. I haven't read Permaculture 1 or Permaculture 2 or, Mansabu Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution, which she recommended to me. She said I would like it. I downloaded it, so I have it on a hard drive, but I haven't had access to a computer in a long time because most of my stuff has been packed away in boxes for a good part of like a year or two. I've been living very minimally, and I don't have a lot of stuff that I use, so so those are some sources and some things that I should myself look into. Jane herself was a professor of, I think, wildlife biology, and wildlife biologist herself. She did a lot of survey work for endangered or, threatened species. And, I would consider her work also humanitarian. She was very humanistic. She saw a lot of things in a very spiritual way, and sometimes the way that we would take care of some of the plants that we took care of was out of in honor of some people in her life, or some influences. And so I think my coffee's done, which is good. If you can't hear, the whole neighborhood is alive, and it's past 11, maybe 11:30. The culture is entirely different. It's the weekend, and There's still taco stands open on the street. There's still people sitting outside eating and enjoying conversation, and there's restaurants open. There's music playing. It's very lively. Um, I still assume my audience somehow, if I'm gonna have an audience, is not just gonna be me, but somehow my old group of friends or Americans, quote unquote. I should probably make these videos in Spanish in case that isn't the case. But these are just introductory videos, and therefore let me get back to introducing some of my founding ideals. Jane was very inspirational. I speak of her in the past tense because I'm not in contact with her anymore. She's currently working in Guatemala with the Peace Corps. Teaching. She loves to teach. She has a lot to teach. She has a lot of information. And in the 5 or 6 years that I worked with her, I feel like I didn't even learn a fraction of what she had to potentially teach me specifically. But I'm grateful for the time I got to spend with her, and yeah, I hope in the future I get to see her again and maybe show off some of my own work. So yeah, that's the first bit. Permaculture, Bill Mollison, Jeff Lawton, Mansabu Fukuoka, who I can't personally, recommend because I haven't gotten around to it. But I will in due time. I'll have some time. So working backwards, the reason I was interested in permaculture is peak oil. Peak oil and sustainability. My interest was in sustainability and mitigating the potential effects of a system's collapse brought on, I believed, primarily due to hydrocarbon depletion, and not necessarily just not depletion in the strictest sense of the word, but production capacity limits. Excuse me. And so I started my research into homesteading, sustainability, green energy technologies, and that sort of thing. And it was all a little disheartening because private property and capital always seemed to be the thing, and permaculture seemed to be one of those things that you didn't have to buy into. A lot of the courses, they were expensive. I did mine as a work trade. It was a very, very fortunate experience that I happened to have come across. I met Jane, because of an ad that she put out for somebody to do some weed management, abatement, control, on her property, and I responded, saying I'm interested in permaculture, and you mentioned this on a permaculture mailing list, and apparently there wasn't a lot of people on that mailing list who responded. I was probably one of the few, or the only one, and that was uplifting because some of these courses, they run up thousands of dollars, and yeah, those will offer, like, you'll have some food, or you can camp out while you're learning. There are workshops and stuff like that. But I had already read the Permaculture Designer's Manual, and I had downloaded a lot of other media on sustainability, and it was a contrast to the information on green energy, because the green energy and sustainable energy, renewables, or whatever you want to call it, were depressing because they required a high input of energy in terms of fossil fuels. And getting back on topic, I guess, is that that's another thing that I believe should be referenced here. That was, fundamental to my path, peak oil, and that goes back to my interest in anthropology and civilizations in general. The study of civilizations, which I have a few highlights out of my personal layperson's self-education. I was very interested in anthropology and civilization and stuff like that, and so out of that, some recommendations I can make are, Jared Diamond's work, specifically two books that I've read, Guns, Germs, and Steel, and Collapse. The first one covers why civilizations rise and, others don't develop so complexly or, massively. And, some of the factors leading to that. And the other one talks about why civilizations collapse, and that's, obvious, the name. It can be implied, can be deduced, and so I really liked those books, but I was led to those books because of my interest in human nature and human society in general. And one of the books that I read before then was called Beyond War. I forget the author, but ever since middle school I was interested in biology, and I thought biology was a major factor in human behavior. And Beyond War talks about how on a behavioral level humans are not predisposed to war with one another or kill one another, and that these are, more or less inventions of a hierarchical society. This paternalistic hierarchical society that has, immense inequality and elitism, and that the study of primates leads us to the conclusion that is only supported by the study of human societies. Western cultures are not the sole example of human behavior, and there's hundreds of cultures, and out of these cultures, is the support of the observations in primates that lead us to believe that humans are generally cooperative and, not warlike, not inherently violent, and when you do see these, aggressive tendencies when they manifest, they are based off of, things like mate rivalry and, differences in like, like a woman will go with another man, and that former man will, out of rage and jealousy, kill the other man, and that's murder. That's not war. And what we see in modern civilization is a lot of warring, a lot of killing of innocents, and these bystanders, and this violence by proxy that the state enacts. And so I was led into that field by my interest in systems of government and society, as well as biology. Because I'm all over the place. I've been all over the place, and the past several years, it's been kind of a lull. I've been more or less focused and haven't been all over the place. But before, I was scattered in a variety of different subjects, and I studied communism. I got to read the Communist Manifesto. I read guerrilla warfare, and started to get a little bit into counterinsurgency. I got the field manual from the U.S. Army, I think, on counterinsurgency, and it wasn't a light read, so I didn't like it so much. But guerrilla warfare was an enjoyable read. Thank you, Che Guevara, for being good with words. And my interest in guerrilla warfare and more or less leftist movements and Marxism and communism led me to the EZLN, the EZLN, or the Zapatista National Liberation Army, Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. And it ties back with my memories of childhood, when this happened when I was a boy, in 1994, and I wasn't old enough to comprehend it, but my father used to be in the military in Mexico, and he said that the roots of the Zapatistas were campesinos, farmers, basically. But he believed, he believed the state media. He told me when I was a kid, they're foreigners who have come to agitate the people, the rabble rousers, and they don't care about the indigenous people. They're with the French, or they're with the Germans, and they're trying to instigate hostilities between the state and the people. Of course, I believed him up until I started doing my own research much later, and found out that the Zapatistas held a lot of the beliefs, a lot of the ideals about neoliberalism, colonialism, imperialism, and this globalized society that has enveloped the world. It resonated so much so that that there was a specific message that was put out by Subcomandante Marcos that said that they welcomed anybody who wished to fight for these ideals, and since then I have found out that was then, and now they would like their autonomy to be unbiased by outside perspectives. They think they're running things the way that it works for them, and they don't want to see outsiders come in and try to co-opt their movement. Very respectable. But a bummer for me, because I would have run off and joined them. In fact, when I was growing up, I thought a lot about, how to fix the country, Mexico, and, what I could do to contribute to that. Came to the early realization that legalization of drugs was the number one most likely effective measure, seeing the example of prohibition in the United States and what that led to, and the parallel that was visible in the cartels But even recently, I've come to more information saying that the cartels, narcotráfico in Mexico, is a tool of the state to politicize and to militarize and effectively to distract the public from the wrongdoings of the politicians. And it is its own social class. It's its own socioeconomic class. Politicians in Mexico earn exorbitant amounts of money, and meanwhile the average citizen lives in poverty. And the most disadvantaged is the indigenous person. And so I have a lot of empathy for the indigenous people. I feel like I have to. My lineage is, part Spanish, part native, but this has turned into a personal thing, where I intended to talk about some sources, but I guess this is important too, since I'm introducing and all that. But yeah, so I'm part Spanish and I'm part native, but because of the Spanish part and because of colonialism and its oppressive influence, a lot of my indigenous roots have been completely erased. I don't know any indigenous languages of Mexico. Spanish is not the indigenous language of Mexico. There was hundreds of languages in the Americas, and it even goes back further. The Aztec Empire was an empire that oppressed other indigenous groups. They enslaved and they killed and they warred. It was a very warlike state. So I have a lot of empathy for the indigenous people that just want dignity, land, and freedom, because those are things that I want too. And I feel like the Spanish part has kind of robbed those things from the indigenous part, and I'm both of those things. So I can't say, oh well, I kind of have to try to honor both. But But the indigenous people of Mexico are a minority. The mestizo, the mixed race, form the majority, and the predominantly white, Spanish-blooded form the upper classes. So that gives you a little perspective into how I view the world. I did a lot of research into economics and found that, I personally believe that a state-run economy is functional, but it's easily corrupted, easily can become totalitarian. Benevolent dictator, leader of the revolution in Cuba, Fidel Castro, is an example of that. He has done a lot of good for his people. I respect him, but I also understand his flaws and his shortcomings. He has he's dead now, and I saw people cheering in Miami. Why would you cheer for the death of someone? That's inherently hateful. His repression, his censorship, and his cultural, stagnation of Cuba has to be weighed against his state-sanctioned medicine, among the best of the world. Standard of living, reduction in inequality, civics, and I'm trying to find a way to phrase literacy reduction. I guess that's the best way to phrase it. But he shouldn't have stayed in power, in my personal opinion. He should have given up the reins, at least to the Communist Party. But even then, there's flaws. So yeah, those are some things that I can cite. You can do research on those things, and my background, and recently I have become less statist. I used to believe that the existence of states was a function of human culture, and I understand now that these things are, yes, they're a function of culture, but they are malleable, and they should be malleable for the survival of the species. They should be prone to adaptation. Evolution. I'm running out of time here, so I'll make this into a multiple part, thing. And so, because of my personal experience and because of, the concurrent increase in police violence in the United States, or the media awareness of it, happened. I was subject to police violence myself, and then coincidentally, unfortunately, a black man in America was also subject to it. The media jumped on it. I'm glad. Good. It didn't die down. It kept happening. And you saw a lot of polarization in society, people refusing to accept what was happening as, for what it was. Structural racism, institutionalized racism, and, racial profiling doesn't work. Statistically speaking, it's not more effective. I understand why it's in place, culture, but it's ineffective in form of, policing. So I'm not a statist. I'm more or less sociocrat. I've recently come across the term. I don't know if I'm using it correctly because I'm not yet comfortable with it. It's like an anarchist, but with the caveat